The old train tunnel was a secret, whispered about in hushed tones around campfires. It was more than just a hole in the ground. It was a dare, a mystery, a place where shadows danced and stories twisted. Locals called it the mouth of nowhere, saying trains had gone in but never came out. The official story was a collapse. The truth, or what passed for it in this forgotten corner of the world, was far stranger. 4 friends, Maya, Alex, Ben, and Chloe, heard those whispers. They were 5th graders, too old for bedtime stories, but not too old for adventure. Maya, the leader, had a map scribbled on a napkin from an old-timer at the local diner. Alex, the gadget guy, carried the flashlights and walkie-talkies. Ben, the brave one, or so he claimed, clutched a small, worn compass. Chloe, the observer, had a notebook to write down everything they saw. They met at the edge of the woods, their bikes leaning against the trees like tired horses. The entrance to the tunnel was hidden behind a curtain of ivy, a dark gash in the hillside. It smelled like wet earth and something else, something old and unsettling. "Ready?" Maya asked, her voice a little shaky. Alex fiddled with his flashlight, as I'll ever be. Ben puffed out his chest. "Let's do this." Chloe just nodded, already scribbling in her notebook. Tunnel entrance, dark, smells funny. They pushed aside the ivy and stepped inside. The air grew colder, the silence deeper. The world outside, with its sunshine and familiar sounds, vanished behind them. They were alone in the dark, ready to uncover a secret that had been buried for a long, long time. The beam of Alex's flashlight cut through the black, revealing a narrow passage. The ground was uneven, littered with loose rocks and puddles of water. Each step echoed, bouncing off the damp walls. Their adventure had begun. Deeper they went, the tunnel swallowing the light from their flashlights. The air grew thick and heavy, making it harder to breathe. Water dripped from the ceiling, each drop echoing like a drumbeat in the vast emptiness. Ben's compass spun wildly, the needle never settling on north. "My compass is broken," he announced, his voice tight with worry. "It's probably just the rocks," Alex said, trying to sound reassuring, though his own face was pale in the flashlight beam. "Lots of metal in the ground messes with them." Maya consulted the napkin map. According to this, there should be a turnoff soon, an old maintenance tunnel. Chloe, still taking notes, added, "Compass, acting weird. Air, heavy, hard to breathe." She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. The temperature had dropped noticeably. They walked on, the only sound their footsteps and the steady drip, drip, drip of water. The walls of the tunnel were rough and damp, covered in a layer of slimy moss. Strange shadows flickered in the corners of their eyes, playing tricks on their minds. Finally, they reached the turnoff. It was a narrow opening, barely wide enough to squeeze through. The air coming from it felt colder, almost icy. "You guys hear that?" Alex whispered, his flashlight beam shaking. They all stopped, listening. At first, there was only the silence of the tunnel. Then, a faint sound, like a whisper, reached their ears. "What is it?" Ben asked, his eyes wide. "I don't know," Maya said, her voice barely audible. "But I don't like it." The whisper grew louder, becoming a low hum that vibrated in their chests. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Chloe grabbed Ben's arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "Let's go back," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go any farther." But it was too late. The hum was getting louder, and the darkness seemed to be closing in around them. They were no longer just exploring a tunnel. Something else was happening, something they didn't understand. The tunnel had them now. Ignoring Chloe's fear, Maya, driven by a thirst for discovery, led the way into the narrow maintenance tunnel. The hum intensified, making their teeth ache. Alex fiddled with the walkie-talkies, hoping to find a signal, anything to break the oppressive silence. "Static," he muttered, frustrated. "Just static." Suddenly, a voice crackled through the walkie-talkie. It was faint, distorted, but definitely a voice. "Did you guys hear that?" the voice said. Alex froze. That was his voice. He hadn't spoken into the walkie-talkie. He looked at the others, his eyes wide with disbelief. Did I just say that?" he stammered. Ben frowned. "Say what?" Before Alex could explain, the walkie-talkie crackled again. The same distorted voice repeated, Did I just say that?" This time, it was Ben who went pale. That's what I just said." Maya grabbed the walkie-talkie from Alex. "Hello? Who is this?" she shouted, her voice trembling. The walkie-talkie remained silent for a moment. Then, the distorted voice spoke again. This time, it was Maya's voice. "Hello? Who is this?" it echoed. A wave of fear washed over them. It was like the tunnel was mocking them, repeating their words back to them in a twisted, distorted way. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face. "Make it stop," she cried. "Please make it stop." But the walkie-talkie wouldn't stop. It continued to broadcast their own voices, echoing their fears and anxieties, twisting their words into something sinister. The tunnel was no longer just a dark and spooky place. It was alive, and it was listening. It was mimicking them, and it was getting closer. They were no longer explorers, they were prey. The initial excitement had vanished, replaced by a chilling dread that settled deep in their bones. They were not alone. Maya dropped the walkie-talkie as if it were a hot coal. It clattered on the rocky floor, the distorted echoes still sputtering from its speaker. She covered her ears, trying to block out the terrifying sounds. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ben, his face pale and drawn, pointed to the walls. "Look." Scratched into the damp stone were strange symbols, unlike anything they had ever seen. They looked like a mix of letters and pictures, twisted and distorted. Some resembled faces, frozen in silent screams. Others looked like maps, leading to nowhere. "What are those?" Alex asked, his voice trembling. Chloe, despite her fear, forced herself to look at the markings. She pulled out her notebook and began to sketch them, her hand shaking so much that the lines blurred. "I don't know," she said, "but they're old, really old." As she drew, she noticed something else. The markings seemed to be moving, shifting slightly, as if they were alive. She blinked, thinking it was just her imagination, but when she looked again, they were definitely different. A face that had been smiling was now frowning. A map that had been pointing left was now pointing right. "They're changing," she gasped. "The drawings are changing." The others stared at the walls in horror, watching as the symbols twisted and writhed before their eyes. The tunnel was no longer just mimicking their voices. It was changing the very fabric of reality around them. The air grew colder, the hum louder. The darkness seemed to press in on them, suffocating them. They were trapped in a living nightmare, surrounded by echoing voices and shifting symbols. The tunnel was playing with them, toying with their fears, and they had no idea why. All they knew was that they had to escape before it was too late. But the tunnel wouldn't let them go. It had them in its grasp, and it wasn't about to let them leave. Their adventure had turned into a desperate fight for survival. They were no longer just exploring, they were being hunted. Panic clawed at them. They turned to run back the way they came, back to the main tunnel, back to the entrance, back to the world. But the maintenance tunnel seemed to stretch on forever. The walls narrowed, pressing in on them, making it hard to breathe. The ceiling lowered, forcing them to duck. It felt like the tunnel was shrinking, squeezing the life out of them. "It's getting smaller," Ben yelled, his voice cracking with fear. Maya, her heart pounding, tried to remember the way back, but the tunnel looked different now. The markings on the walls had changed again, twisting into new, more menacing shapes. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten. They stumbled forward, their flashlights casting frantic beams across the walls. They passed the spot where they had entered the maintenance tunnel, but it didn't look the same. The opening was smaller, almost completely blocked by rocks. "That's not right," Alex said, his voice trembling. "It was bigger than that." They tried to move the rocks, but they were heavy and unyielding. It was as if the tunnel didn't want them to leave, as if it was actively trying to trap them. Desperation set in. They pushed and pulled at the rocks, their fingers bleeding, their muscles aching, but it was no use. The opening remained blocked. "We're stuck," Chloe whispered, her voice filled with despair. "We're never getting out of here." Tears streamed down her face. She sank to the ground, defeated. Ben joined her, his head in his hands. Alex continued to struggle with the rocks, but his efforts were futile. Maya, however, refused to give up. She shone her flashlight down the maintenance tunnel, further into the darkness. There had to be another way out. There had to be. "Come on," she said, her voice firm despite her fear. "We have to keep going. There has to be another way." Reluctantly, the others followed her. They moved deeper into the darkness, further into the unknown, hoping against hope that they would find a way out of the tunnel before it was too late. But with each step, the tunnel seemed to grow smaller, the air colder, and the darkness deeper. They were running out of time. They walked for what seemed like hours, their flashlights dimming, their hope fading. The tunnel twisted and turned, each bend looking the same as the last. The markings on the walls became more frequent, more disturbing. They seemed to be watching them, judging them. Suddenly, Alex stopped. "Wait," he said, his voice strained. "Did you see that?" He pointed to a section of the wall. Scrawled across it in what looked like dried blood was a message. "They are always watching." A chill ran down Maya's spine. She shone her flashlight on the other walls. More messages appeared. "Turn back. You don't belong here. They know your names." Paranoia began to creep into their minds. Who was watching them? What did they want? And how did they know their names? Ben began to mutter to himself, repeating the same phrase over and over again. "It's not real. It's just a dream. It's not real." Chloe, her eyes wide with terror, started to giggle uncontrollably. "They're funny," she said, her voice high and shrill. "They want to play with us." Maya tried to shake her. "Chloe, stop it. This isn't a game." But Chloe just continued to giggle, her eyes glazed over. It was like she wasn't even there anymore. Alex, his face twitching, began to argue with himself. "We should go left. No, right. Left, right. I don't know. I don't know." Maya realized with horror that her friends were starting to lose their minds. The tunnel was getting to them, twisting their thoughts, breaking them down. She had to do something. She couldn't let them fall apart. She grabbed Alex by the shoulders and shook him hard. "Alex, focus," she shouted. "We have to stick together. We have to get out of here." Alex blinked, his eyes clearing slightly. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. "You're right," he said. "We have to focus." But even as he spoke, Maya knew that it was too late. The tunnel had already claimed them. They were trapped, not just physically, but mentally. They were losing themselves to the darkness. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. The adventure was over. The nightmare had begun. The change in her friends was subtle at first, a slight shift in their expressions, a strange echo in their voices. But as they continued deeper into the tunnel, the changes became more pronounced, more disturbing. It was as if something was copying them, mimicking their personalities, twisting them into grotesque parodies of themselves. Ben, who had always been the brave one, now cowered in the shadows, whimpering at every sound. He started repeating Maya's phrases back to her, but in a mocking, sing-song voice. "We have to stick together," he'd squeak, his eyes darting around nervously. "We have to get out of here." It was like he was making fun of her, but there was something else there too, something sinister, something not quite human. Chloe, who had always been the quiet observer, became hyperactive and erratic. She ran ahead of the group, laughing hysterically at nothing. She started mimicking Alex's gestures, fiddling with imaginary gadgets, and muttering about static. Just static. She'd cackle, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Lots and lots of static. Alex, who had always been the logical one, became consumed by indecision. He couldn't make up his mind about anything, constantly changing his opinion, contradicting himself. He started mimicking Ben's nervous tics, twitching and muttering under his breath. "It's not real." He'd stammer, his hands shaking. "Or is it? I don't know. I don't know." Maya watched in horror as her friends transformed into distorted reflections of themselves. It was like the tunnel was using them, twisting their personalities, turning them against each other. She felt a growing sense of dread, a certainty that they were all doomed. She tried to talk to them, to reason with them, but it was no use. They were too far gone. The tunnel had taken them over completely. She was alone now, surrounded by twisted parodies of her friends. The adventure was long over. The nightmare had become reality, and there was no escape. Or so it seemed, a faint glimmer of hope, or perhaps just a trick of the light in the oppressive darkness, flickered in the distance. Was it another tunnel, or something else entirely? She had to find out, even if it meant facing the darkness alone. The glimmer of light beckoned her, a siren's call in the suffocating darkness. But even as she started toward it, a seed of doubt sprouted in her mind. Was it really a way out, or was it just another trick, another illusion designed to lead her further into the tunnel's grasp? She glanced back at her friends. Ben was huddled against the wall, rocking back and forth, muttering about shadows. Chloe was skipping down the tunnel, singing a nonsensical song about static and smiles. Alex was pacing back and forth, arguing with himself about which way to go. They were lost, completely and utterly lost, and she couldn't trust them anymore. Not really. The thought stung, a sharp pain in her chest. These were her friends, the people she had shared secrets and laughter with for years. But the tunnel had changed them, twisted them into something unrecognizable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow different. Were they even her real friends anymore? Or were they just copies, echoes created by the tunnel, designed to deceive her, to lead her astray? The messages on the walls echoed in her mind. They know your names. They are always watching. Who were they? And how did they know so much about her? A sudden thought struck her. What if one of her friends was working with the tunnel? What if one of them was secretly leading them deeper into the darkness? The idea was absurd, ridiculous, but she couldn't shake it. Paranoia gnawed at her, poisoning her mind. She looked at Ben, his face hidden in shadow. Was he pretending to be afraid? Was he secretly enjoying their torment? She looked at Chloe, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. Was she really that lost in her own world, or was she putting on an act, trying to lull her into a false sense of security? She looked at Alex, his face contorted with indecision. Was he really that confused, or was he deliberately leading them in circles, trying to disorient them? She didn't know who to trust anymore. She was alone, surrounded by strangers in the bodies of her friends. The tunnel had succeeded. It had broken them apart, turned them against each other. And now she had to make a choice: trust her friends and risk being betrayed, or trust herself and face the darkness alone. The glimmer of light seemed farther away now, the darkness deeper. The choice was hers. The clock was ticking. Maya checked her watch, or tried to. The screen was blank. She remembered looking at it just moments before, it seemed, and the battery indicator had been full. Now, nothing. Just another way the tunnel was messing with them. She tried to remember how long they'd been in the tunnel. Had it been hours? Days? It felt like a lifetime. Time had become meaningless, stretched and distorted like a funhouse mirror. Minutes stretched into hours, hours compressed into seconds. She remembered entering the tunnel with bright sunshine overhead. Now, it felt like they had always been in the dark. That sunlight was just a distant memory. She looked at her friends. They seemed to be aging before her very eyes. Ben's hair was streaked with gray. Chloe's face was lined and gaunt. Alex's eyes were sunken and bloodshot. They were withering, decaying in the tunnel's oppressive grip. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The tunnel wasn't just twisting their minds, it was stealing their time. It was draining their life force, feeding on their fear and despair. She had to get out. She had to escape, not just for herself, but for her friends. Even if they weren't really her friends anymore, even if they were just twisted copies, they deserved to be saved. She took a deep breath and made her decision. She couldn't trust them, not completely, but she couldn't abandon them either. She would lead the way, and they would follow. They would stick together, even if it meant facing the darkness hand in hand. She turned toward the glimmer of light, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. "Come on," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We're going that way." Ben, Chloe, and Alex looked at her, their faces blank, their eyes vacant. For a moment, she thought they wouldn't move. But then, slowly, hesitantly, they began to follow her. They walked on, deeper into the tunnel, further into the unknown. The glimmer of light seemed to grow brighter, but the darkness around them seemed to deepen. Time continued to warp and twist, stretching and compressing in unpredictable ways. They were lost in a place where time had no meaning, where reality had no boundaries. And they had no idea what awaited them at the end of the tunnel, or if there even was an end. The horror of the tunnel was far from over. As they walked, Maya noticed a faint flickering from the walkie-talkie that Alex still carried, though he seemed oblivious to it. She reached out and grabbed it, ignoring Alex's vacant stare. The static was louder now, almost deafening. Suddenly, a voice cut through the static. It wasn't the distorted echo of their own voices. It was a different voice, a deep, raspy whisper that seemed to vibrate in her bones. "Help us," the voice croaked. "We're trapped down here." Maya froze, her blood running cold. She looked at her friends. Ben was still muttering about shadows. Chloe was still skipping and singing. Alex was still arguing with himself. None of them could have spoken into the walkie-talkie. "Who is this?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. The voice on the walkie-talkie didn't answer. It just repeated the same chilling message over and over again. Help us. We're trapped down here. Help us. We're trapped down here." Maya realized with a jolt that the voice wasn't coming from them. It was coming from someone else who was trapped in the tunnel, someone else who had been there for a long, long time. And then the voice said something else, something that made Maya's heart stop completely. "They never left," the voice whispered. "They never left the tunnel." Maya dropped the walkie-talkie, her hand numb. The chilling message echoed in her ears, filling her with a sense of dread she had never experienced before. They weren't alone. They had never been alone. There were others in the tunnel with them, others who were trapped, others who were desperate for help, and they had never left. They were still there, lost in the darkness, trapped in a timeless prison. The glimmer of light seemed to dim, the darkness to deepen. Maya realized with a sickening certainty that they were not going to escape. They were going to become just like the others, just another echo in the tunnel, just another voice crying out for help. They were never going to leave. They were going to be trapped down there forever. The chilling message of the walkie-talkie had confirmed it. They were doomed. The tunnel had won. There was no hope. Or was there? Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a sliver of a chance. But what could they do? But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Maya saw something. It wasn't the glimmer of light. It was something else, something new, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the wall. She ran to it, her heart pounding with renewed hope. She examined the crack closely. It was small, but it was there, and it seemed to lead somewhere. She called to her friends, but they didn't respond. They were too far gone, lost in their own twisted worlds. She was on her own. She squeezed through the crack, scraping her knees and elbows. On the other side, she found herself in a small chamber. The air was different here, fresher, less oppressive. And there was a faint light, not the eerie glimmer she had been following, but a real light, a natural light. She ran toward the light, and suddenly she was outside. She was standing on the hillside, the sun warm on her face, the wind in her hair. She had escaped. She had made it out of the tunnel. But as she looked back at the crack in the wall, she saw something that made her question everything. Standing in the entrance to the crack were 4 figures. They were small, almost translucent. They looked like echoes of herself and her friends. They stared at her with empty eyes, their faces blank, their expressions unreadable. And then they slowly faded away, disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. Maya stood there for a long time.